Yeah, hi everyone. Unfortunately, the intro part of the workshop was cut off, so I'm just gonna re-record the part when I was talking about micro interactions, and then the rest of the workshop is recorded, so that's fine. So micro interactions are moments of interaction between the user and design that create a delightful, informative, and memorable experience for the user. And micro interactions can add to the overall user experience by encouraging engagement, displaying system status, providing error prevention, and communicating brand. So, with the example that we see on the right, we can see several micro interactions being used in this design to communicate different messages. So, dragging to perform a certain action, like deleting an item or adding an item to a certain list or clicking on an item to view more details on it. All these different interactions that have been added to the design are micro interactions. And so moving forward, micro interactions have four parts to them that combined together create the actual micro interaction and are just helpful to think about as well when you're creating your own. So the first is trigger, an action by the user or system that triggers the event. So this is just the action that happens either from something the user has done or just the system itself automatically triggering the interaction. Rules, what happens after the micro interaction is triggered. So, with the example on the right, clicking upload file starts the animation of the XD file, moving from its current position into the folder opening, and then the progress bar appearing. So, those are all the different steps that happen after the micro interaction is triggered. Feedback, what the user sees, hears, or feels once the macro interaction is triggered. So in this example that we have, what we see is more of a visual um, it's more of visual feedback, so we can see the file moving into the folder and the progress bar loading. So these are all visual forms of feedback. And the loops and modes determining changes to a micro interaction if the condition changes. So if something was different, if it was a different file being uploaded, or if it was, the button being used in a different context, like how would these changes affect how the micro interaction plays out?
So to start off with, I actually want to show you the preview of what we are creating in XD. So I'm just going to preview that. So this is the first one that we're doing. It's a menu icon and we want to animate it opening and closing, but we want to add, we don't want it to be like an instant switch between open and close. We want to add some more flair to it. We want to turn it into an actual micro interaction. So this is the effect that we're going for. So when the menu is closed, we want it to appear with these two squares that are filled. But then when it's open, it's almost as if the content from the squares is draining out and then appearing outside the containers as well. So I'll just kind of show that once again. So this is the interaction that we're going for. If you did download the XD file, definitely follow along. I provided the first artboard for each interaction, but you can now follow along as I build and show you how to create the next artboard in order to have your micro interaction. So I'm going to start off with, let me just make sure my keyboard is on. I'm going to start off with rebuilding the first artboard, just to give everyone a sense of how you'd also come up and compose the first artboard. So to start off with, we're going to draw our two squares. So they can be any size really. And then I'm just going to remove the fill and then add a new fill or add a border rather and set the size to maybe 15. Yep. And because I'm a big fan of rounded rectangles, I'm also going to add border radius as well of like 35. But if you are doing this on your own, feel free to kind of use whichever type of values that you want as well. And then to duplicate this square, so for anyone new to XD, I'm also going to try and highlight specific actions. Command D on Mac is how you can duplicate any shape on your artboard. So I'm going to duplicate the original square. I'll leave it at 35. And then I'm going to drag it until it shows me using these guidelines that it's in the middle of the artboard. And then I'm going to leave it there. And then I'm going to duplicate these squares once again, because we want to make sure that we're creating the second part of this element, which is the longer rectangles that appear as we open and close the menu. So for these longer rectangles, they're both selected. And I'm going to add a fill color to them. So I'm going to use the same red that I was using before. And these ones, I'm going to make them slightly longer. So yeah, around that size is good. And I'm just going to select everything and make sure that it's in the middle of the artboard. But just dragging, and XD will automatically align things either in the middle vertically or horizontally for you as well. So we have like essentially the main components of our interaction set up. But if we were to go back to our sample, we'll notice that we also have these elements that fill in the original squares and then also shrink as well. So we need to add those components too. So I'm actually gonna select everything again and add, kind of increase the border radius for them as well. So to create those elements, what I typically do is I'm gonna select this first square and I'm going to duplicate it once again. And I'm going to add a fill color to it. So I'm gonna make it red. So now it's full because we have another red square on top that's kind of covering the entire previous square. But since this is we want to make this artboard the first part, so when it's closed as opposed to open, we need to minimize this initial square. So we're gonna minimize it until it's really small, and you can't really see it because it's technically one width and two height, so you really can't see it at all. And that's the effect that we want. So we're gonna also duplicate this, Command D on Mac, and we're gonna move our new shape down so that it's now on this second square as well, because we need them on both. And then I'm gonna hold Alt on my keyboard and look at the guide. So it's telling me how far from the top and bottom that it is, because I want to make sure that it's centered as well. So I'm just going to move it around and make until it's centered. Now that's completely set up for us. So before I shrink these, I'm going to actually duplicate this artboard. So to duplicate, similarly, you can hold Shift, Option, or Alt, I guess, and then just drag the artboard and it'll create a new artboard for you, which is exactly what we want. So in this particular case, we have our menu icons that are open and protruding outside. So in this case, we want to minimize them. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm going to select both my longer rectangles and I'm just going to drag them until you can barely see them, just like that. So really that's just you dragging both rectangles with your mouse or using the trackpad until you can barely see them. They're still there. So if I dragged across the artboard, it'll still highlight them. So yeah, don't worry, they're not gone. It's just that the width is set to 0, so you can't see them at all. And then over here, I'm going to select, I'm actually going to click and drag to select. So I select both, and then I'm going to select the larger one to make sure that it's not selected. And I'm going to increase the size of this rectangle, or rather square, once again. So just manually resizing it until it takes the full width and height of the square that it's in front of. And I'm going to do the same for the square here. Just going to click and drag them upwards and downwards as well. And just like that, we have our closed menu and we have our open menu. So obviously we want to make sure that this works accordingly. Right now we've just been designing on the artboards, but we also want to make sure that that the interaction also functions right. So if you want to animate between artboards, you go to prototype mode in XD, and then you can either select the artboard or select an element in the artboard that will start your animation. So actually we want to make this a tap animation. So something that happens when you tap on this element. So in order to do that, we need to actually group the element first so that XD registers it as a grouped element as opposed to individual components. And you also have to make sure that your layer names are consistent across artboards when you are animating in XD. In particular, when you're using auto animate, which is the animation mode we're going to use, it essentially animates the different interactions without you having to manually adjust them yourself. So if I were to go back here and I grouped this, you'll notice this kind of comes out as group 281 and this is group 280. So they're different layer names, which means XD is not going to animate them as you would want it to. So we're just going to make sure that this is the same name. So we'll call this menu object. And then on our second artboard, we'll also call this menu object. So now if I go to prototype mode, I'm going to click the actual object, and then I'm going to drag the arrow to my second artboard. So we've already set the trigger. It's a tap interaction. It's set to auto animate, which is what we want. And then you can adjust the easing options and duration options as well as you would want it. So let's preview the first part of it. Awesome. So it works exactly as we'd want. But what happens when we click it again? Nothing, because we haven't set up the animation for closing as well. So if I were to click our group and this artboard, and then same thing, drag the arrow to my first artboard, and I'm going to leave all the settings for easing and duration the same as well. So if I click my first artboard and then the preview icon here, so I click it, and then menu icon or menu element closes, and I click it again and it opens. So we have our really easy, really nifty menu interaction done for us. Just like that. So yeah, so that was kind of our first interaction. Hopefully fairly easy to follow, but if you have any questions about that, definitely also put them in the chat and we'll go through them at the end of the session, or reach out afterwards if you need any more additional help. So this is an example of a micro interaction that's more so for sometimes a visual reference, so you can actually see that your menu is opening and closing, or it's maybe more of like a fun interaction. You don't want to make it too simple and straightforward, so just adding more flair to it. But our next example is going to be a good example of a micro interaction that's more so for adding flair. So adding to the user experience in a fun way. And this is the type of interaction you'd see also for heart icons. So if you're liking something on an app or a website, or you can apply to really any instances that you'd like to use. But in this case, we're going to go with a star interaction. So this is slightly more, I guess, advanced than the previous one, but also pretty straightforward as well. So I'm sure you'll be able to follow along too. But if I click, I believe I made this a click interaction. So this is our star interaction. When we click it, we have the star turn yellow, or rather we have a yellow star pop out. And then we also have those flares pop out as well. So I'll kind of do it again. So if you briefly saw them, and we also have like a double tap interaction to this. So when we tap it again, it goes back to gray, but we don't have the flares once more. So we're going to have two parts of this micro interaction. So I'll play it once more. We have our yellow star pop out, and then I click it again and it disappears and our gray one goes away. So yeah, this is the second type of micro interaction that we are gonna go for in this session. So same as the previous one, I'm just going to click and drag this artboard down here, and then I'm gonna delete everything on it because I wanna also show you how you build this from the ground up, so to say. So to start off with, there are a couple of different ways with elements like stars. You can either download a star icon. So there's a really great plugin called Icons for Design that gives you access to a lot of free icons from different places. So we can use Icons for Design. I already typed in star, and then just select the star we want to go with. So maybe we want to go with this yellow star, or rather, sorry, a black star that's filled in, and then you'd have it accessible to you to do whatever with. Or alternatively, you can also just design your own stars, because XD allows you to do that. So if I select the triangle tool here, or polygon tool, I think it's called, and I click and drag to draw my triangle, now I can adjust this so I can add more sides to it. So right now it's 3, and I think I want to make it 5. And right now it kind of looks like, I think it's a polygon. I'm not familiar with the terms, but we want to make it actually look like a star. So there are a couple of different ways you can do it. Either you can play around with these two value fields here. So this is star ratio, and this is for corner radius. Or you can use the handles on the actual element. So I'm going to go with the handles. So I'm going to click and drag this. Just give XD a section. So that way, we're kind of making it go inward a bit more, so it looks more like a star. So I think roughly till there is pretty good. And then I also want to kind of decrease the border, the corner radius as well. I'm going to maybe play with that, and then yeah, I think that's pretty good for me. So yeah, we'll go with that. So I'm going to make it gray for now. Just kind of wait for it. Yeah, I'm going to make it gray for now. And one thing we also want to make sure that we're doing is converting our elements to a path. So because it's using radius, you'll notice that if you try to enlarge it or shrink it, your edges, your corners become sharp as well. So the element slightly changes as you resize it. So to avoid that, you can hold Command 8 and it'll convert it to a path, or alternatively, you can go to Object and then Path, and then convert to path as well. So now that we've converted it to path, that's good. I'm actually going to rename this to star 1. Okay, so similar to how we did before, we're going to be duplicating a lot of these elements. So I'm going to duplicate our star and I'm going to name it star 2 because this is going to be the yellow one that we have popped in our second artboard. So I'm going to make that yellow, and then I'm actually going to duplicate my artboard already, just so I can keep track of all my elements. And on my second artboard, I'm gonna leave the yellow as it is, the yellow star as it is. And on my first one, I'm going to shrink it so that you can barely see it. And then in my second artboard, I wanna make sure that the gray star that we have in the background, we also completely shrink as well, even though you can't see it for the animation or interaction that we want. We will kind of want the yellow star to pop out and the gray one to kind of shrink inward. So we have to make sure we resize that as well. So the next thing we're gonna add is, if we noticed in the preview I showed, we have these like lines that explode outward, as well as like a circle that explodes outward. So we're gonna add those as well. The first part, we'll add our circle using the ellipse tool, or the shortcut is E on your keyboard. And we're just gonna draw a circle. Make sure that it's centered. You can use these alignment tools here, and then we're going to remove the fill. We don't wanna fill, we just really want the border. So our border, we're also gonna make yellow, and we just need to make it thicker so you can also see it as it animates. So let's say we make this 35 is pretty good. And I'm just gonna copy this from this artboard and paste it on this artboard as well. So before I shrink this on my first artboard, I'm also gonna add, actually I'll probably just shrink it anyway. Make it as small as possible. And actually for the ellipse tool, I'm gonna move it so that it's behind my star elements. So similarly with layer names, you also wanna make sure that all your elements are also arranged similarly in all your artboards. So if the ellipse element is behind the star element in the first one, just making sure that it also is in the second. And then I'm gonna add in my line. So, okay, I think I'm just gonna use the line tool, which is L on your keyboard, or you can click the tool right here, and I'm gonna draw a line. You can hold shift, so you're drawing straight lines as well. And then I'm gonna also make this, I think I'll make it maybe 40 for the width of the thickness of the line. And I'm also gonna make it curved as well, because I don't want it to look straight. And for my lines that are gonna explode outward, I'm going to make them red. So we're just gonna copy this. You can also, I realized I only showed you duplicate, but if you hold an element and hold Alt or Option, it's also gonna duplicate it. So with our lines, we wanna group them as well, so that they explode, or rather they expand as we want them to. So we've grouped our lines, and then I'm just gonna select both of them and Command D to copy them. And now if I hover right above this handle, I can rotate it. So I kind of wanna rotate it to minus 60 degrees. And then I'm gonna duplicate them again. And this time I don't really need to rotate them. I could just flip them horizontally and you get the same effect. So awesome. So I'm just gonna copy our group of lines and paste them as well in our second artboard. And in this one, I'm gonna make sure that they're also really small and at the back. So we want them to be behind the stars. The shortcut for that in XD is Shift Command left bracket as well. So it's gonna move completely behind. So same thing here, Shift Command bracket. Although I actually think I want the ellipse to be behind the stars. So I'm gonna do the same thing here, move the ellipse behind the stars. So on this artboard, if we leave the opacity of our circle border and our lines to 100%, you're also they're not gonna disappear, and we want the disappearing effect. So I'm gonna select both of them, and then you can either drag the appearance opacity to 0, or the shortcut is just pressing the number 0 twice really fast on your keyboard, and it'll do the same effect. So let's just see what our interaction looks like. So we also want this to be a tap interaction. We're gonna pick our star and then click and drag to our second artboard and then set our auto animate ease in and out. That works. And let's just preview to see if it works accordingly. Oh, awesome. Oh, except if we notice our lines kind of did a flip there, which I guess is still cool, but also maybe not. So let's just kind of go back into our group and then figure out how to reorganize our line. It's so funny. Okay, I think it's these ones that I flipped. I'm just gonna select them. 160, let's me do so. These are the ones I think I flipped. So I'm gonna unflip them and then I'm just gonna rotate them. And let us see if this prevents the flippy effect that we have. But if it doesn't, then I guess it's still cool. It adds more flair to our design. Okay, it doesn't, but it's completely fine. So we're gonna leave it as is for now. I kind of like it. And then for our last artboard, really quick, we're just gonna create an interaction. So what happens when we click the yellow star again to bring the gray star back out? So we're just going to go into our third artboard, select our gray star. So we named that star 1 and increase the size of it. Once again, just make sure it's the same size as the yellow one. And then we're going to take our yellow one and then shrink it so it's really tiny and you can't see it. And then on prototype mode, we're just going to click the yellow star and then add a new interaction. So in this case, I think I actually want it to be a snap effect. You can play around with easing until you find one that works for you. So yeah, going back to our first one, we have our stars and then it goes back to gray. So we don't really, the problem with setting your second interaction back to the first one is that all those elements, so the circle and the lines, are gonna animate going back into the star, which is kind of weird. We don't really need them to show them going back. So that's why we added a third artboard with the additional interaction. So just like that, our star micro interaction is done. So maybe this is something that we use for ratings or adding to favorites. A lot of different ways you can use an element like this in your own design. And so next we have our final interaction. I hope we have enough time because I do want to leave at least 10 minutes for Q&A. I haven't been able to check the chat, so I actually don't know how many questions people might have. So I'm just going to go through this, not quickly, but quickly. And at the same time, hopefully it makes sense. And this is kind of the more advanced micro interaction. So this is a submit button. We click submit, a progress bar appears, and then once it's done, we have a check mark to show that it's done. So I'll just kind of show that once more. So yeah, a lot of different components to this, but I also don't think it's entirely too complicated, and there's definitely opportunity to explain how it can be done. So I'll just play it one more time for my own visual reference too. So yeah, okay, let's get started with our final micro interaction for this session. I'm just gonna, actually, I'll just kind of use this. Click and drag and create a new artboard. And just delete the previous elements that were on there. Okay, so we're going to draw a rectangle. We're creating a button, essentially. So we'll just kind of do that. I might make it slightly smaller. If you hold Shift and Alt on your keyboard to resize, it will resize proportionally as well. So that's also another tip. And then I'm going to increase the radius so it kind of looks more like a pill shape. And I also don't really need a border for it. I'm just gonna add the red fill. And then T for text, also a shortcut in XD, and add in the word submit, if I spelled that right. Oh, submit. Okay. And then I'm gonna kind of place that there, center it using our alignment tools, and I'm going to make it white as well. And just make it smaller, like maybe 50, and center it too. And we don't really need it to be black, so we can just kind of make it bold as well. Okay, awesome. So we have that set up, and then I'm just going to duplicate this artboard too. Find a lot of time with animating things in XD. It's just about setting up your artboards, and then you just copy elements over from here to there as you remember to add things. So I know that on my second artboard, the submit text kind of moves downwards and actually moves off the artboard. So before I actually move it, so if I were to move it now, drag that, you can see that it's technically off the canvas completely. So we only have rectangle on this artboard. So before you move elements off your artboard canvas, you actually have to set the link them in prototype mode first. So I'm just going to go to prototype. I'm going to, okay, for now, I'm going to just click the entire artboard and link them. That way, when I go back to design mode and I click and drag my text, even though it disappears, it's still on the artboard canvas. So it's still here, submit, and that's what we want. So that's awesome. And then I know that on this one, we also have the start of our progress circle. So I'm actually gonna duplicate this pill. So Command D, and I'm going to decrease the width. So it's the same as the height, right? So height is 148, so I'll make this 148 as well. And I'm gonna remove the fill and add a border instead. Just kind of make sure that's centered as well. For our border, I think we'll make it 10 as well. So before I change the color, actually I might change the color anyway. I know we want this to be red. And then also we want our main button shape to kind of, we're giving off the illusion that it's changing into this progress, circle progress indicator, even though it's not technically not what's happening because we have two elements that are doing it for us. But I'm gonna decrease the size so it's like super tiny and at the top here. So it kind of animates as if it's shrinking bottom to top, if that makes sense. And then obviously we have our lips here, but we wanna set that up so that it animates a progress interaction. And I'm gonna show you how you can achieve that in XD. So with our outlined circle selected, I'm going to increase the dash value to, so dash value basically makes your border dashed in case, anyone wasn't sure. But we want to play around with it, kind of use a hack to make it so that it's a progress indicator that's loading. So we're going to set it really high, I think like 450, actually higher than that. Let's make it 500. Oops. Let's make it 500 maybe. Make it 530, okay? And then I also want to set my gap because I don't want the outline or rather border to break. I'm also going to set that really high to 100. So I'm actually going to decrease the size of the dash. I want to make sure that it is rotated so that when we're doing our interaction, it looks like the progress indicator is loading as normal, so clockwise. So we want to kind of make sure our element is rotated to reflect that as well. And then we can go back to original value of 530. And then I also want to make sure that my ends or the caps are also rounded because that's the aesthetic that we're going for. So just clicking that option here as well. And with that, our progress indicator should be done. Before I kind of adjust it, I'm going to duplicate my artboard first, have it there. And then on the second one, we want to show that it's starting. So it's at the start point. So we have to decrease our dash value, I believe till 0. Yep, till 0. So you'll notice that it's kind of just this circle here. But as you add to it, it's like it's increasing as well. So because we set it to be fully, I'll kind of use the term fully complete in our third artboard, XD will animate it accordingly. So we also kind of want to make sure that our progress circle that we're using is also on the first artboard, making sure all layers are consistent throughout. So I just kind of copied that from the second one and pasted it on the first. And I'll just drag it under the submit. So this is our third interaction. And then in this one, we have our, I'm just gonna take that. If we remember the original button pill shape that we have, that's the shape that we're gonna use to essentially bring out that red circle with the check mark. So we're gonna be using that shape. So first I'm gonna align it back to being in the middle. So just using our alignment options on the top right. And then I'm gonna hold shift and just making sure that it's, and then just making sure it's completely centered as well. And then we're also going to get our check mark Like I mentioned before, we have icons for design, which is a great plugin for finding different icons. So I'm just going to get any check mark that works. Let's use this one from Feather Icons. If we click it, it should appear, and there we go. We'll just center it as well, and then increase the size. So like till there, and make it white too. And because I want it to be a bit thicker too, I'm just going to increase that, the border thickness. So awesome. So I'm just going to duplicate. This is our last artboard. So we're going to duplicate this artboard. So this is going to be our final interaction and what we want it to look like, which means on our first artboard, we need to shrink everything, right? So I'm just going to start with the circle, select, and then hold Alt and Shift and make it super tiny. And then same thing with the feather icon that we're using, hold it and then make it super tiny as well, so you can't even really see it. And with that, our entire interaction should be set up. But as always, you got to preview to make sure everything's working accordingly. So instead of the, I'm actually going to make the tap interaction. Oh, actually, let me undo that first. And then add the tap interaction if they press this rectangle. So auto animate, we're going to go with ease in and out. And let me delete that. And then for the remaining interactions, we actually want to make them timed because we don't need to be clicking anything. It's just supposed to happen automatically. So we're going to set our trigger to time, and then we don't need a delay, so we're going to leave that as is. And then same thing with the third artboard as well to the fourth. We're also going to make it timed. But for this last one, I might also want to make it a snap interaction instead, just so it has a bit more zing to it, I guess. I don't know. Okay. But yeah, let's preview. And, if we set everything up accordingly, it should work. But if not, we'll just have to kind of figure out maybe where we messed up. So we click submit, our progress indicator loads, and then our check mark appears. So yeah, worked as we wanted to. So just to preview that again, and then we get our check mark. So yeah, I think we kind of actually finished in time as well. There's a couple different micro interactions that I wanted to go through in XD and how you can essentially use XD to create a lot of different types of micro interactions. But now that we have 10 minutes left, I definitely want to leave time for questions as well, about anything really, or even just questions that are maybe about of things that you might need help or assistance in. So I'm actually gonna stop presenting. So everyone can actually see me. I don't know if people could see me before. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, definitely let us know. Or I know Susan collected questions, so let me actually check. And I'll also, I think I set an option to like mute everyone, but that seems mean. And also, so let me actually bring back that option for turning on your mic. But yeah, if there are any questions, I'm going to answer the ones that Susan had collected during the session. But if you have more, then either you can turn on your mic and ask, or you can just type it in the chat and I can answer from there as well. But to answer some of the ones that have already been asked before, the first question is, can this be done in Figma? Yes, I believe so, because the interactions that I covered today aren't super complicated or technical. So I believe that you can also do them in Figma or any type of design or prototyping tool that you are more comfortable with. So yeah, definitely try it out as well on other platforms if you'd like. Second question is, what exactly did the path function do? When I converted it to path. So the path function I typically use with shapes that I create in XD. So since we created the star shape from scratch using the elements that XD has, sometimes you'll find that when you try to resize those elements, it changes slightly. So maybe the radius decreases, so it looks slightly sharper as opposed to being more rounded. Or I'm trying to think of another example, but essentially to converting the element or shape to a path sets it so it looks exactly like that regardless of what size it is. So whether you're increasing the size or decreasing it, it'll look as you created it in the first instance. So I hope that explains why I sometimes convert shapes to paths.
Elsa, I have a question.
Okay, wait, hold on. I forgot that I muted the site. Sorry, you can ask again. Sorry, I didn't hear your question. Yeah.
Yes, hi Elsa. So
Hi.
I asked about the path question. So is it
Yeah.
like the same like how we use in resize in the Figma? Is it same as that?
Yeah. Is there a path function in Figma as well? I believe it should be the same, as in if you convert it to a path or to outlines,
There's a
it'll
scale
stay.
option, I think.
Yes. Yeah, that's what it does.
Thank you.
No worries. Thank you for the question. And then I think someone else had a question from earlier. Where can we find the advanced microinteraction tutorials for XT? There might be YouTube videos for advanced interactions, or alternatively, even courses that people are hosting about that kind of content. But you can definitely do your research and try to find more advanced tutorials. If this is easy, you can definitely find more difficult ones as well that can help you improve your prototyping skills in XD. I just don't know any off the top of my head that I can recommend, but I'd recommend checking out YouTube or Udemy or any of these course platforms. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Do we have any more questions in the chat? It doesn't have to be about the workshop, it can be about XD or just questions for me specifically. Feel free to ask. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you so much. Oh, we have more questions. Okay, Karthik asks when to use frame/component/groups. I don't think XD has frames. I believe that is Figma. But when to use components, you would use components if you want to have multiple instances of the same element throughout your design. So the best example is the button. You're typically going to keep a button, the styling as it is consistently throughout your website or throughout your app, whatever it is that you're designing. But let's say down the line, you want to change the color of your button. It would be really tedious to go in and change all the individual buttons on each of your artboards. So using a component just helps you change the main component and then it affects all the various instances you've used as well. So it kind of just helps speed up your workflow. And then groups, I think, just help group elements together. I hope that answered your question. And then Amrut asked, any inputs for 3D microinteractions in XD? That's such a cool idea. Gosh, I don't know if I've ever done a 3D microinteraction in XD. You definitely could. XD has a feature, if I remember the name correctly, I'm just going back to my XD file, 3D transforms that you can activate. So you can turn it on for an element and then apply 3D transformations to it. So I definitely imagine that you can use that feature to come up with your own cool 3D microinteractions. I don't think I've just done that yet, but that's a very good idea for maybe a future workshop as well, how to create 3D microinteractions in XD. Yeah, no worries. Thank you everyone for joining. Susan, I wonder if we can play our soothing background music while the session is ending. We have a couple of minutes left.
Yeah, I think
so if anyone has more questions.
I'm sorry, Elsa. I think there's some questions on Slido. There's one participant, Dennis, mentioned that. Probably some people are posted on Slido. If you have time, we can check it out too.
Okay, wait, what's the question? Is it on the Slido?
Yeah.
Or... I don't think I see the question on the Slido. If the person is here, if they can retype it or just repeat it again. Or maybe it was a question about how to use Slido.
No, we have a participant named Daniel Winghoff, and he just slacked me and some questions that he saw on the Slido. But if you
okay. Yeah. Okay, so do you have them or did I answer them already?
I just forwarded the same message in this call if you want to see.
Okay, let me.
Okay, yeah, please do.
Yeah, let me share with you on Slack message.
Oh my gosh, these are a lot. Oh no, we only have 3 minutes. Okay, I will answer as many as I can, and then I might answer more in a post on social media as well. Oh wait, Andres asked also in the chat, do you teach any courses for microinteraction? I don't teach any course at the moment, but maybe in the future. Thank you for asking. It's very nice. So, we have so many key differences between microinteractions for web versus mobile. That's a really great question. I think a lot of microinteractions are probably similar across the different screen sizes. So for like buttons or icons, it kind of be the same regardless of whether they're for mobile or for web. So I guess it's like it's more about what types of microinteractions you could do on one platform that maybe you couldn't do it for another. So maybe if you have a mobile specific elements that you have. So let's say if your menu is expanded on your website, but on your mobile it's minimized, then that would give you the opportunity to create a microinteraction for how you'd expand the menu on mobile. So that's an example of how maybe on smaller screen sizes you get to use more microinteractions with like icons and smaller elements compared to larger screen sizes, if that helps. And then our second question, I think we have time for like maybe 2 more before Google Meets kicks us out horribly. What's the best thing about Adobe XD as compared to Figma, since most are using Figma these days? That's a good question. I think for me, XD is just a tool that I'm more comfortable with using, although I use both because I think it helps to know more than one design platform. So XD is the one that I started out with, so it's kind of just the one that I became more comfortable with using. And I also use it for stuff outside of just UI UX design. So I use it for social media posts, designing social media posts, designing presentations, really designing a lot of other things outside of website and app design. So that's why I use XD, but I think it's a lot more personal in terms of what platform you choose to use. And it should be the one that you are most comfortable with 100%. But yeah, I think we have a minute left. So I don't know if we have time to do more questions before Google Meets closes. But thank you everyone for joining. I'll answer the other questions probably on LinkedIn or something, and also share the link on the YouTube video. And I'll be sharing the recording with you as well. But thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope you learned something from this workshop and session and found it useful. If you have feedback, definitely reach out about that. I would love to hear what could be improved for a future session as well. But thank you. Thank you so much for joining.